Hey guys, my name is Zach Montgomery, and this is this week's episode of Built by Liquidation. We are a resellers podcast geared towards helping resellers not only grow their resale business, but also look a little bit towards the future and how to get out of that resale business, investing your profits in avenues that generate recurring income. On this week's episode, we are talking Whatnot, specifically my experience with Whatnot, my opinion on the app, and why ultimately it did not work for us, but how it could possibly work to grow your business. So we're going to get into it right away, and we're going to talk about when we got started, how we got started, the product we used to get started, how we grew our channel to ultimately somewhere around 15,000 followers, nothing huge, but we did that in a very short window. We're also going to talk about the challenges that we faced, how we scaled quickly, why we ultimately chose to get off the app, but why I do think it is a very big benefit to a lot of resellers out there. So let's start from the beginning. I pulled up my app just to see when we actually started. So we ran Whatnot last year. We started middle of March. We ran towards, it looks like the end-ish of May. And so we'll start from the beginning. So our first, looks like 2 weeks in Whatnot, we ran approximately $28,000 in top line revenue. We started so back up a little bit. A ton of liquidation companies got into Whatnot over the last couple of years, and it's just really exploded with liquidators and resellers. It's always been resellers, but it really exploded with liquidators. So we jumped on the bandwagon last March, and my initial kind of thought of how to use the app, and I've seen a lot of people do it, was just random pallet pulls. And we took random, literally. So we took coffin boxes. If you don't know what a coffin box is, it's a large box from Amazon, similar to a mystery box, just bigger. And we dropped the pallet, and we pulled items out one at a time, literally random, from the box. And my initial goal was to be able to run about 100 items per hour, run a 3-hour show. That should have been roughly a pallet and a half worth of product. Right away, it looked like we were going to run about a $5 per unit average on a cost of about $1.50, which sounds phenomenal. What we quickly figured out was, number one, the average was skewed very heavily. So you'd have a ton of stuff that just flat out didn't sell. So we had a lot of leftover product. A lot of our numbers were coming from a few items, and then the rest, we're selling a lot of $1 and $2 and $3 stuff. So we'd have, items of 300 items that we'd sell, we'd have 10 or 20 that would sell for 50 plus. The rest would sell between 1 and 3. That we'd have a lot of stuff that just didn't sell at all, and we weren't really hitting our number of 300. Why we ended up stopping the random pulls, we were shipping a lot of product for $1 and $3. So obviously on Whatnot, the buyer pays for shipping. We're not doing free shipping, but when you sit there and you do the math on $1 or even a $2 item after transaction fees, you're left with between 40 and 60 cents on a $1 sale. Double that for a $2 sale, right? So we're spending the time and the labor shipping a lot of product that we're actually gross netting out 60 cents. Cost of material to ship it, because even though we'd get a lot of free shipping material, you're still paying for a lot of it. There's no way to get everything you need for free, and then you're paying labor. So after about 2 weeks probably of doing the math on that, it just really didn't pay to have someone else do it, because a lot of the top line gross was coming from a few items. We were packing and shipping hundreds of items a day in that $1 to $3, and then we still had a leftover. We still have to figure out what to do with that leftover product, which is just piling up at that point. So overall, it was an encouraging start, but we found out that we would have to do a pre-sort to go through and get the stuff that we knew would sell well for above 50, and then we would have to then come up with a system to sell the stuff that wasn't selling. And so we did what most liquidators do in that in that situation, we started a processing center, essentially, right? Processing 2 loads a week of raw LPN product, taking anything that retailed $80 and up, and processed out everything else, and we sold that to bin stores. So now, in order to get the product for Whatnot, I had to hire 2 additional people to process the raw load, and now I was responsible for selling 2 processed loads a week. So in order to get the product I needed for Whatnot to work properly, we now had to we had to have some more steps in place. So whatever, that's fine. We did that, but where that left us was not enough product to run our shows, because again, we're only pulling the $80 and up product, which on most of those trucks was a couple hundred pieces per truck. I wanted to run, in order to pay for a new building, even though we own the building, in order to pay for that space, we would have to run 3 shows a day, 3 days a week. So the top line product of that wasn't enough. So we had to bring in additional product. And so we're having to go to someone else who's processing their loads and buy their top end product from them. So we went with Target Electronics, which were tested and working, and we went with Amazon Electronics, which had a value of about the same of what we're doing, $80 and up. Amazon high end. I think it started out as electronics, but it's more Amazon quote high end goods. So that's the next step that we went to. Now, into our credit, we quickly scaled that. We went from 2 weeks selling, the lower end stuff, and then we jumped up. So the first 2 weeks we sold $30,000 worth of product. The next 2 weeks we did $65,500 worth of product. The next 2 weeks after that, we did another $66,000 in product. So we quickly scaled this to $120,000 a month if you average that out. The issue and the challenges that we got to is, so we're processing some of the product ourselves, which is already kind of an issue because you have to bring in the additional staff. Now we're in the space, and I got to sell it, or somebody on my team has to sell the product. So we have to keep that processed load has to be a quality load, so we don't have an issue selling it every week, but that's still capital tied up over there until we sell it. Now we've brought in Target, we brought in electronics. So what do we do on the testing side? Because now you're talking about testing 1,000. We'll do the math, right? We want to run 250 items per show, which is 750 items per day, times 3 days a week. It's 2,500 items a week is what we are selling, right? And the goal was really to be at 300, but realistically we got to 2,500. So what was the challenge in testing 2,500 items per week? Is it feasible to test that? Because the average person can cleanly test about 15 items per hour, depending on what that is. It takes a lot longer to test a computer than it does a blender. So you're looking at the cost of that, if we were to test it, was $1 an item minimum, or $2,500 additional a week. But it's also staffing that, because to staff that 2,500 divided by 15 items per hour, you need 666 man hours divided by 8 hours in a day. That's 21 days, right? You only have 6 of them in a week, or 5 of them in a week, so you need 4 additional staff members to get that number. So we made the decision that it wasn't worth testing and checking all of the items. We would just take returns if there was any issues. We didn't. There was no questions asked policy. We would just take the return, which causes more issues, right? So how returns work on Whatnot, at least when we were on the app, is the customer couldn't just return us the product. They had to go through Whatnot to return us the product, and then more times than not, Whatnot just kept the product and refunded the buyer. So we were left without product coming back and without cash, which is fine. If the item doesn't work, we don't want the item back. But it would also ding our account, leave us a negative. So what we would try to do, and this is probably outside of the terms of the app, is your item doesn't work, send us a message. We will just credit your account. We can issue credits. We found out how to do that through the app. So buy something else from us, we'll just credit your account. And that worked for a little while. But the issue is, it's the numbers. How do you calculate the numbers. So we're running, $120,000 a month, but how do you also calculate how much product doesn't work? Because we're selling 2,500 items a week. It's customer service on the app because you're selling 2,500 pieces. Even if everybody, we have a lot of recurring customers, but there's still hundreds of different people you're selling to every single week. So it's customer service. You're having people at that scale. You're having so many people message you, "Where's my stuff? When you shipping out my stuff?" We had a 2-day shipping policy. We couldn't get any faster than that, and we'll talk about the challenges with shipping in a second. But it quickly became a staffing problem. How much staff do you need? Because again, we're running 3 shows a day. So you need 3 different showrunners 3 days a week. So you need 3 different people to run shows, because as funny as it seems, running a show for 3 hours is difficult. Like, it's keeping up with that, your pep in your step, your attitude. You have to be engaging with your customer every single, for 3 hours. It's moving because we're moving product. And I'll talk about the systems that we developed in a second. So we're talking about the challenges with staffing right this second. Let me write that down. So here's where I'm at. In order to sell 2,500 units of product a week right this second, right, we're having to process our own stuff, right, to get some of it. I'm having to buy outright at, I think, 12% Target Electronics, and I'm having to buy Amazon Electronics at 25%, 20% of retail. So not only do I have to have the staff to process the truck, to build the process trucks for my wholesale team, we then have to have 3 additional showrunners, because those people can do 1 show per day, a morning show, an afternoon show, and an evening show. So that's 3 staff members for that, 2 staff members to process loads, and those 2 loads will take all week to process. We debated on testing. We tried it. It didn't work. We moved on, but we still have to ship. How many people do you need to ship 3 shows a day? Because you're shipping almost 1,000 items a day. And that's the next problem, right? So we quickly found out every which way not to run these shows and ship these shows. So before I guess we'll talk about how many people we ended up having, which I think was, we had 6 shippers, because we're shipping, remember, 1,000 items a day is what we were selling. And we had a day between shows. So we would run the show in the morning. After that morning show, our first round of shippers would come in to then pack and ship that show. And then our goal was, by the time the second show of the afternoon was done, the first show was boxed up, packed up, and so the shippers could then ship the second show before leaving and ship the late night show the following morning that we weren't open. So we had shippers 5 days a week, even though we only had shows 3 days a week, because Monday's show would ship half Monday, half Tuesday, and Wednesday's show would ship half Thursday, half Friday, and then Friday's show would ship half Friday, and then either Saturday, or you'd have to come in on Monday, which would then, potentially push your whole week back. Sorry. So let's talk about our systems, because now we're up to, like I said, we're up to 6, 9, 10, 11. We're up to 11 staff members right now, is what we had to run 3 shows a week. Now, to be fair, those 11 staff, it was probably closer to 9 or 10, because some of it, 6, 7, some of it was interchangeable. So I don't think we ever had 11 staff members on at one time for whatnot, but it was definitely between about 9 minimum. But that would have to work. So how do you organize 1,000 items a day, not only to be sold, but to be shipped out? And this is where I think a lot of people struggle. And it's where we struggle, to be honest. We struggled to come up with a clean enough system that was so dummy proof that anybody could do it. Because unfortunately, I don't know if anybody else has this issue, but our issue is staffing. It's finding people that want to work, not only want to work, but want to care enough to follow a system. And that's where we spent so many nights and days as as our upper management team, designing ways to make it foolproof. And I mean that, in the nicest way, but you have to make it idiot proof. So we finally came up with a bucket system was our best way to go. So essentially, and I can draw this out, and maybe, I don't know if you're watching this on Spotify, I'll try to describe it. But essentially, we would have about a 10 by 10 space. In the middle would be a table, and that's where we would showcase the items, a banner behind us, and then we would pre-fill bins. So imagine, the black totes, but we'd have shelves that would fit about 30 bins per shelf, and that was our show. So we would pre-fill the bins 1 through 10. About 10 items could fit in the bin, sometimes more, sometimes less, but we kept it at 10, so it'd be equal. So we pre-numbered every item before going on, which was another task for these people. So all of the prep work is what's important, but all the prep work also takes away from the profits, and that's what we'll get into it as we go. But back to our setup. In the middle, we had a table, and that's what we put the item on the table, showcase the item. Now, if I'm facing the camera, to my immediate left would be the bin. I could be getting this backwards, but whatever. To my left was a rack of bins. Now, it rolled, and that's important. In the beginning, it didn't roll. We quickly adjusted. It needed to roll, and I'll tell you why. But we had 30 bins, 10 items per bin, 300 items. Really easy math. And then on the right side was the same rack that could fit 30 bins, but it was empty. So we'd pull the first bin, 1 through 10. You'd set it on the table. Boom. Sell the item. Move on. Boom. Sell the item. Move on. And then once that bin had sold through, I'd take that tote that I just emptied, I'd have it refilled, I'd set it back into the empty bin that would slowly fill up. So what would happen is one bin would be full, or one shelf would be full, one rack would be full, and by the end of the show, it would have swapped. And then what was super cool is that bin rolled right into shipping, where the shipping team could then easily find the items that had sold based on their label. Because that would be the second most time-consuming aspect of this whole thing, is locating your items. So the way Whatnot works is, depending on how you do it, right, is you can have you'd have the title, the description of the item, and that's what's on the customer's receipt or their pull ticket, right? So if you describe your item, I'm having to teach people to look for, Arctic Air Ultra Cooler. Go find that. Or what we did is we item number X and then did the title. So they should be looking for the number and then verifying the description next to the number. So it's kind of a double check system. So it goes into the shipping. They look, okay, well, Bobby got 2, 3, and 6. Number 2 was an Ultra Air Cooler. Number 3 was a Duke Cannon deodorant. Number 6 was a microphone. Awesome. Those numbers match up. That looks like that's what it is. They can pack the order. And that should have been a super foolproof way of doing that. And unfortunately, somehow it still wasn't. Items were, I don't know how, but items were winding up in the wrong boxes. Customers were getting the wrong shipments. And it's a possibility, because we were running so many shows in a single day, that, show 1 was getting confused with show 2. So, hindsight's always 20/20 looking back. Instead of, if we wanted to do 6 shows a week, I should have done 6 shows, 1 show per day. And I think that would have been a little bit more of a cleaner way of doing that. So, would I go back to it? I still wouldn't, but not just for those reasons. So that was our system. Shipping would get the items. Now, what we did, and this might be valuable to somebody, is the person who pulled the order did not pack the order. In theory, they weren't supposed to. So we had one puller, or we had teams of 2, right? So 3 teams of 2. One person goes and pulls the order. One person packs the order. And that way there's 2 people that should be double checking that, right? It's about a system of double checks. And in theory, if the person who pulls it checks it, the person who packs it checks it, if there's any discrepancy, somebody should have caught that. And it's one of those, you just got to find the right people. And we were scaling so quickly that I don't think we found the right people in the moment. And we accepted that, that, what's the word that I'm looking for? Mediocrity, which I think a lot of us end up doing in positions like that. Where it's a $15 an hour position. We accept the mediocrity because, I don't know about anybody else, but when we try to hire, it sucks because we typically hire because they showed up, right? We called 10 people, we scheduled interviews for 10 people. Of those 10 people, 2 show up. Guys, we needed 5. We needed 5 people to hire. We're going to have to take those 2 that showed up because they showed up. So my takeaway from that is we got to stop accepting mediocrity. I think we accept mediocrity because we don't feel like we have time to spend to go after better talent, and that's something that us for sure we have started to do better at. We fire quickly. If you're not down for the team, just move on. We don't need people. I can teach you the job. I can teach you how to do it more efficiently, but I can't teach you to care. And I don't need you to care after 5 o'clock. I need you to care from the hours of 9 to 5 when I'm paying you. If I'm paying you 100% of your paycheck, I need 100% of your effort to come to work. That's all I'm asking for. So we've talked about our system. We've talked about the shipping, which, the shipping, another issue that we ran into, I think a lot of people, is it's the shipping USPS. It's shipping the post office. The center that all of our product goes to is in Fairburn, Georgia, and it's made national news several times for how crappy of a job they do. They lost so many packages. We had at least 2 shows that got completely lost, never found, never reimbursed because they never got scanned. So this is something I think people should understand is at the level that we're shipping, we couldn't take it to the post office. They stopped accepting our drop-offs because of how much we were shipping. The post office in town just couldn't handle the volume, and so they would send the post office on a big semi to pick our stuff up. Well, the issue was they wouldn't scan the packages individually because there's 1,000 packages. They wouldn't scan them, and so we'd give them a scan sheet. They would scan the scan sheet, but you got on this part, right? Because the scan sheet only helps you maintain your shipping, right? So you get credited from whatnot for being on time if they scan your scan sheet, but you're not protected on lost packages until your package gets scanned, and that happens at the center. So if your product gets lost between the pickup and the center, you're screwed. Nothing happens for you. So we thousands and thousands of dollars lost in that. So we've talked about our staffing, shipping. We've talked about the systems that we use in order to get all of this done. Now I want to sit down. Well, let me do the last thing we pivoted to, and then I'll sit down. I'll break down all the numbers. So our goal, obviously everybody's goal is as much cash as possible to get run through. Now the issue with the product that we're selling is it's profitable, but it's not as profitable as you would think. And this could also be because of our business, right? So our business and how we ran on Whatnot was war on retail. We're a liquidation company, and for the last 15 years or so, I've sold to resellers. My business is geared towards selling to resellers so that they can make money and they can turn a profit. So most of the buyers on the app in general are already, I feel like, resellers, but even more so, our clients were resellers. So we didn't have as many of those items going for, retail pricing. Our average 35%, 32 to 35% was our average recovery of retail. So you can imagine trying to buy for that is tough, especially when you start adding in the returns, adding in labor. The margins are extremely thin. but the volume is what's supposed to make up for that. And we'll break down the numbers at the end. But we've pivoted in the last year or so, War on Retail has, to closeouts, closeout deals. We work with a lot of brands and companies going out of business, and we liquidate for them. And so what that gives us is a high volume of single SKU deals. And what that means is I've got an ultra air cooler that this camera's propped up on. I had 5,000 of them. Now, the best way for me to make as much money as I can on that deal is to sell it to the end consumer, like a Whatnot channel. So on Whatnot, or in a retail setting, discount retail setting, I should get $10 to $12 a unit for that item. When I wholesale it the way I do now, I get only $3 to $4. So obviously selling through a channel like Whatnot is way more profitable. The issue is, how many of those ultra air coolers can I sell? And this is what ultimately led to us, walking away from the app, is I couldn't sell enough. I could sell 10 of those coolers per show before people stopped buying them altogether. And when you have 5,000, you can only sell 30 a day. It would take you 5,000 divided by 30. It would take you 166 shows. And we're doing 166 days worth of shows, and we're doing, you're getting 3 of those a week. It would take you 166 divided by 3, 55 weeks. It would take you a solid year to sell that deal. And that's if you could maintain the number. So that was really my final kind of nail in the coffin, was I couldn't move enough of what I needed to move to make it worth it. I didn't have enough closeouts to where I could have just straight shows of closeouts. So in order to move the closeouts, everything else had to fall in place. I had to process the product. We had to source the electronics. We had to source the target. We had to sell and ship all these things. And then all I was doing this for was to move my closeouts. And I couldn't move enough of my closeouts to make a difference. And that's what, inevitably led us to say, okay, all of this the juice isn't worth the squeeze at the end of the day. Because what was the most profitable is the closeouts for us. We make and we'll go into more details on videos and podcasts of our closeouts, but our closeouts are why we're still in the liquidation game. The rest of it to me is played out. The margins suck. The closeouts we're making a shit ton of money on. I can make a shit ton more if I can find a way to move my closeouts to the end user versus having to wholesale all of them. But Whatnot was not the answer for that, because even though the volume in general is great, it's not a good platform to move volume of a single SKU unless you just have multiple channels, and the issues just at scale become large. So I'm going to wrap this up by explaining one more time, our challenges with the app and why we ultimately decided not to pursue it further. But then also I'm going to give you a little bit of encouragement if you're thinking about doing the app and jumping on there, or if you're already on the app, I have encouragement for you. But for us, the biggest challenges were scale. Anything I do today, I have to look at it of, can I grow this to scale where it's worth my time? Because we've got a lot of projects, a lot of stuff going on where time is the most valuable thing that I have, and I can't get it back. And if I'm going to focus on something, I've got to focus on what I get the most out of for that time. So I was spending, in the moment, I was spending probably 40 hours a week on Whatnot, whether that was, selling myself, because, I enjoyed jumping on there, but whether I was selling or I was, training to ship, sourcing the inventory, selling inventory that we had to process to get the product for Whatnot, dealing with returns, whatever it was, I was spending probably 30 to 40 hours a week on this app to generate a gross sales of, $100,000 a month, which by itself isn't a bad deal, right? $100,000 a month in gross sales sounds like a lot, but when you sit there, we own the space, we own all of our warehouse space, and that's, it's more content and more podcasts, but I still have to charge myself a fair market rent for the space that I'm using, because if I don't, I could rent it to somebody else, right? So I have to pay myself rent. We had staff of 8 people that I would say, we'll say 8, we'll say 6 full time, and then we'll say we'll say 9, 6 full time, we'll say 3 part time. Either way, we're employing 9 people for this one thing. You still have utilities, you still have stuff like forklifts, you still have the product costs themselves. So that 100,000, we'll say that was 35% of retail, right? So 100 grand. I'm gonna do some terrible math here. What is that? Is that 600,000 in retail? Maybe 300,000 in retail, give or take, right? Just for easy numbers, we'll say it was 300,000 in retail value, right? So my cost on that, on average, we'll say it was 20. Well, no, we'll say it was 16% because we bought the electronics at 20, the Target at 10 or 11, and then we had others. So we'll say, what did I say? 16% was our cost. So 300,000 at 16%. Our cost on that 100 was 48,000. So our gross profit before anything else was 52,000. This number doesn't include returns, which I think were at least 10%. So then you got to take away another 10,000. So we're at 42,000. You got to take staff, 9 people. We'll say an average of $650 a week times 4. You're looking at $20. We'll say 22 for round numbers, $22,000 in staffing costs, which leaves us with 20,000. Rent would have been 5,000. That's 15,000. And then there's some hidden stuff in that. So all of that to make $15,000 a month net profit, and that's probably generous. I can probably whittle that number down a little bit more when you start factoring in utilities, forklift, and everything else. So call it $10,000 a month. If I had nothing else going, that's not bad money, right? If I had nothing else going on, and this is the encouraging part for people, right? This is where I go, well, this is why I stopped, was the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, because I can't afford to spend 40 hours a week making $10,000 a month, because I've got other aspects of my business that generate a shit ton more than that if I devote my time to those other things, it will generate more than 10,000 a month. So for me, it was not worth continuing on the whatnot path to figure it out, to generate $10,000 to $15,000 in net profit a month when I could spend less time on something else to generate more. The positive for people that are listening to this that are like, well, shit, why would I do whatnot? By itself, it's not bad. I could have grown that to 20,000 a month. We could have made $250,000 a year profit, take home, pre-tax on the app. Now, is that a lot of work? Yes. Do you need to be, in my opinion, you're probably going to have to spend a lot of your own personal time to come up with the systems, to come up with the to train the staff, to get it to that point, to maintain that number. You're going to have to be pretty involved, but it's a doable thing. I think that's the encouraging thing, is it is doable to clear $250,000 in profit, $500,000 in profit by selling through whatnot, because of the volume that you can do. That is the benefit to the whatnot and to the live selling. It's the sheer volume of product that you can move. You have to buy correctly, though. You have to buy low, because you're not selling for high. At least in the liquidation space, it's blown up. It is oversaturated, and so you have to do good at sourcing. You have to do your homework, and you have to train your staff to be efficient. Efficiency, cost of goods, low rent. You don't have to be anywhere that matters, right? You can do this out of your home. You can do this out of a warehouse space. You don't have to have a prime location. If you want to do local pickup, you can. It doesn't have to be prime location for that. So keeping your overhead, it sounds like common sense, but keeping your overhead as low as you possibly can. Don't skimp on paying your staff, because those are the people that are going to help you grow even bigger. We offered commission on our salespeople. We offered a bonus to our staff on shipping if they could go under a certain percentage of problems. So not testing problems, but we had packages showing up that were missing an item, and come back, we found it, they didn't put it in a box. So we offered an incentive if you had under a certain percentage of issues on shipments going forward, we would bonus the shippers. So treat your staff well, offer incentives to do a good job, but you're going to have to be laser focused if you want to hit those kinds of numbers. And it's going to be your, I think, your full-time job to keep that going, because there's so many moving parts to Whatnot and to live selling to move that volume, but it's doable. And if you have any questions about our setup, I think our setup was a good one overall. I think our issue again was finding staff members who cared, and that's on us. We can't accept mediocrity just because we don't have time to find more. So any questions about selling on the app, setting up your space to sell, sourcing goods to sell on Whatnot, I'm happy to give my 2 cents for whatever it's worth. But that is pretty much a wrap on this week's episode of Built by Liquidation. I did not have a guest today, so I'm very curious to see your thoughts, comments, questions for my solo episode. See if I was boring to listen to for 35 minutes or not. But I appreciate anybody listening. If you have any questions for us, please reach out. Thank you for watching. Tune in next week and follow us across all platforms. Thanks.